Thank you, Stefan. Yes, so the goals of this talk are to provide precise and tangible characterization of the distinction between what has been called in the literature esoteric versus exoteric languages, to determine if this distinction cross-cuts the distinction between declarative and procedural memories, and then to seek societal and genetic correlates of this distinction in order to provide a tangible way to engage the neurobiological and the genetic foundation of language variation, which is necessary to shed light on language evolution. So, very roughly speaking, esoteric languages are characterizable as exhibiting simpler, less layered syntaxes, but larger, more complex phonologies and morphologies, with more irregularity and with more formulaic memorized language, as reported in the literature. These linguistic features have been informally linked to certain societal features, the so-called close-knit societies, which include smaller population sizes, less mobility, less communication with non-kin, close-knit communities with high proportions of native speakers, more communication in the here and now, which correlates with less literacy. On the opposite end, exoteric languages are characterizable as involving less complex phonologies and morphologies, but more complex and more layered syntaxes, such as, broadly speaking, more hypotheses, subordination at the expense of parathexis. More specifically, exoteric languages will have more specialized, obligatory grammaticalized distinctions, such as specialized tense marking, specialized role marking, specialized comparative superlative marking, specialized subordination marking, etc. These exoteric linguistic features are hypothesized to be correlated with societal features of what can be called open societies, whose parameters include larger population sizes, more communication with non-kin, larger and more complex social networks, and more distant communications, those detached from the here and now, including literacy. When it comes to language and when it comes to memories, declarative memory is typically, but not exclusively, implicated in vocabulary learning and irregular phenomena across domains, most commonly associated with memorized opaque formulaic chunks of language, including idioms and proverbs, while procedural memory is typically, but again, not exclusively, implicated in compositional automated rule-governed processing of language, as argued extensively in, for example, Ullmann's work. We hypothesize that this distinction is correlated with the esoteric-exoteric language type. So while both memories, and this is important to emphasize, while both memories are essential for language, partly overlapping and partly being able to for the other, partly redundant, and while both language types rely on both memories, our hypothesis is that predominantly esoteric languages rely more on declarative memory, while predominantly exoteric languages, in comparison, relatively speaking, rely more on procedural memory. Because of the overlap and redundancy, we expect this to be only a subtle statistical correlation, not a rigid distinction. This is also consistent with Ullmann's claim that greater complexity of rules or patterns, including grammatical rules or constraints, may lead to a greater relative dependence on procedural memory. What is interesting is that this kind of approach can shed some new novel light on the long-standing linguist's puzzle of trade-offs in complexity. Researchers often report trade-offs in complexity among different domains, such as some languages are more complex in syntax, but less complex in morphology. And it's often argued that every language is, for that reason, equally complex. But this has been a controversial issue, and various views can be found in, for example, Samson, Gil, and Ljiljana's work, a book, edited volume. This puzzle has become crucial for understanding the nature of language evolution in terms of gradually increasing complexity. And the question is, why would this be the case? Why would some languages seem more complex in one domain, for example, morphology, but less complex in another domain, for example, syntax, and vice versa? Focusing on these two different memory types and perhaps differential reliance on these memory types in different language communities might shed some novel light on this puzzle, that is, on why such trade-offs might exist or might be likely to exist, even though they are not inevitable in our view. And Antonio will take over from here.
Thanks, Liliana. Well, for determining which specific parameters of linguistic variation count as esoteric versus exoteric, we will primarily rely on the linguistic features available in words, which is a database co-constructed by one of us, David Gil. We have identified the parameters displayed in this slide as potentially relevant for the esoteric versus exoteric divide, several of them graded, although additional parameters from these and other sources may also be considered. Next slide, please. For determining which specific features characterize close-knit versus open societies, we will primarily rely on the sociological anthropological features available in ethnologue, glottologue, and dplays. We have identified the parameters shown in this slide as relevant for the distinction between close-knit versus open societies, and again, several of them graded. Next slide, please. We will then try to find correlations between each of the linguistic parameters and each of the societal parameters. For the positive correlations, we will determine which parents yield better correlations for the purposes of advancing further, more precise hypotheses about what counts as an esoteric versus exoteric language. With this aim, in addition to available resource, we will conduct original experiments that David Gil will explain in a while. We expect that this approach enables us to advance a variety of specific and stable hypotheses about the natures of prehistoric languages, considering that sociological and demographic information about prehistoric societies is increasingly available. Additionally, we will rank all the available languages on the scale of esotericity versus exotericity, with the goal of using a subgroup of them for our cognitive and genetic studies. Our aim is seeking correlations between neurobiological aspects of interest, gene variation, and the esoteric versus exoteric dimensions. With this aim, we will first compare the procedural versus declarative memory abilities in speakers of esoteric versus exoteric languages. Additionally, we will measure the frequency of different alleles of genes known to be implicated in the development of these two types of memories. And we now describe in some more detail these two approaches. Next slide, please. Regarding our cognitive experiments, we will try to compare procedural and declarative memory abilities in speakers of strongly exoteric and strongly esoteric languages, specifically the subset of languages used by David Gil in his association experiment. We would like to rely on online tests due to the pandemics, but also because of the remote location of speakers. And we have planned to consider speakers with the lowest socioeconomic status in order to minimize the impact of literacy and the exposure to widespread languages. Our goal is testing the hypothesis that using different linguistic parameters and ultimately esoteric or exoteric languages may impact, even though subtly, on performance in these two memory types. While both procedural and declarative memories are domain general in the sense that they underlie different cognitive domains, this does not preclude sub-specialization for language as established with evidence from other domains. Next slide, please. And regarding the genetic analysis, we will look for signals of positive selection in candidate genes for declarative or procedural memory in human groups speaking these two types of languages. Previous research has shown that different genes are involved in the development and function of these two types of memories. Because cognitive biases can be linked to gene differences, we expect this differential reliance concerning both types of memories to be detectable in differences in the allele frequencies of specific genes. Next slide, please. For achieving this, we will make use of data about genomic variation in present-day human groups that we will retrieve from available databases such as the allele frequency database or the 1000 Genome Project database. And signals of positive selection will be determined using a combination of bioinformatic methods. We are aware that the mapping of genes to language, and particularly to types of languages, is not straightforward. At best, we expect to find only subtle correlations between specific alleles of specific genes, scores in cognitive tasks evaluating types of memories and different language features. But at the same time, we believe that these correlations can be informative of past changes of relevance for language evolution and for the evolution of language. And now it's David Gil's turn. He will explain.
So, Ljiljana, can you turn me over?
Yes. You can start sharing now.
Sorry. Yes, so within the framework of examining the correlations between esoteric and exoteric languages on the one hand and different types of society on the other, I've been engaged for the last 15 or 20 years in running what I call the association experiment, whose goal is to measure the degree of vitalization of thematic roles as one particular aspect of linguistic esotericity, and to correlate that with different types of societies. It's an initial experiment which I've been doing in the fields, close to 3,000 subjects so far, on 69 languages in a rather balanced sample, and these languages are visible at the bottom of the table, the slide here. So the goal of the experiment is to test the availability of association experiments, interpretations which are derivable in a very vague sense without recourse to thematic role assignment. Now, if you have a sentence in a language you're not familiar with, and the sentence contains two lexical items, chicken and eat, then basically the interpretation potentially involves two layers. First of all, if you don't understand the grammar of the language, you know that the sentence as a whole has to be connected in some way with chicken and eating. So chicken plus morphology, eat plus morphology can't mean something different like beavers can build dams. This is the basic notion of semantic compositionality. But then, at a later stage, a language can introduce thematic role assignment, which will, among other things, distinguish between chicken is agent of eating, and chicken is patient of eating. And our finding is that esoteric languages basically stop at the first stage, whereas exoteric languages tend to go on to the second stage. The way the experiment's conducted is as follows. Subjects are given a sentence in the target language. Here it's English, the clown is drinking the book, but imagine any number of other languages in that slot. And they're given two pictures, and they can respond in any of four possible ways. They could choose the picture, on the left, picture on the right, both, or as I'm sure most speakers in this highly exoteric audience would do, neither. So in English, the clown is drinking the book doesn't make any sense at all. Ungrammatical. The picture on the left has a clown, a drinking, and a book, but you can't say the clown is drinking the book in English and in other exoteric languages. Whereas in an esoteric language, where you simply say there's a clown, there's a drinking, and there's a book, and they're connected in some way, then you might expect speakers of such an esoteric language to choose the picture on the left. So what I'll present in a moment are the results of the experiment. Basically, they're arranged on extent peripheral, the extent to which you make book to mean what's the picture. The y-axis presents the degree of interchangeability of agent and patient roles. So can you say dog draw to mean somebody is drawing the dog as opposed to the dog by himself drawing? So the further up and to the right you are, the more exoteric the language is. And here are the results of 69 languages color-coded by geography, which is not of immediate relevance to us. But here are the same languages color-coded with respect to a scale of exotericity, a scale of open versus closed society. So the categories that I've been using so far, I'm planning to improve on this in future work. Basically, here we see a four-way distinction between national languages in red, local varieties of national language in seems to be some kind of salmon color, green local languages that have been part of a larger polity, and then blue languages, local languages of hunter-gatherer societies and other similar societies that have only recently become part of a larger polity. And as you can see, there's a very clear correlation. And if you get rid of the green languages, the correlation is even more highly visible. What you see here is that there's almost no overlap between national languages on one extreme and the languages of small, isolated societies on the other. The more open the societal type is, the more highly the grammaticalization of thematic roles is, as we observe in the experiment. To support this even further, one can look specifically at within particular families. So here we have closely related languages in the Malay family. And as you can see, the standard language is higher up and to the right, is more exoteric, whereas local varieties are esoteric. We see the same thing replicated in a comparison of standard Japanese and the colloquial variety of Japanese. And we see the same thing once again in a set of languages, Austronesian languages of Indonesia, where the national language of East Timor is more highly, has more highly grammaticalized thematic roles than other local languages. So to summarize, more exoteric in terms of thematic role assignment is associated, it correlates with more open society. So this is just one piece, but so far our empirically best established piece in the overall picture. So, to summarize the talk, we've been talking about four different dimensions here. Languages, societies, two different types of memory, and the genes that underlie these two different types of memory. And what we're saying is that all of these four things correlate in some way. The association experiment was presented examine the correlation at the bottom of the screen between societies and languages. But of course, these are just correlations. And what we're trying to do is sort out some of the relationships of causality that underlie these correlations. And here the arrows indicate possible directions of causality between the two, but each of these is basically a paper in its own right. So at this point, I will conclude. Thank you for listening, and we're open to questions.